Part 2 of Story 17 of The Fairy Ring. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy Perry. The Fairy Ring, edited by Kate Douglas Wiggin and Nora Archibald Smith. Story 17, Yvon and Finette, A Tale of Brittany, Part 2. Chapter 5. Poor Finette, seated on the seashore, waited all day long for Yvon, but Yvon did not come. The sun was setting in the fiery waves when Finette rose, sighing, and took the way to the castle in her turn. She had not walked long in a steep road, bordered with thorn trees in blossom, when she found herself in front of a wretched hut, at the door of which stood an old woman about to milk her cow. Finette approached her, and making a low curtsy, begged a shelter for the night. The old woman looked at the stranger from head to foot. With her buskins trimmed with fur, her full red petticoat, her blue jacket edged with jet, and her diadem, Finette looked more like an Egyptian princess than a Christian. The old woman frowned, and shaking her fist in the face of the poor forsaken girl,
"Begone, witch!" she cried. "There is no room for you in this honest house."
"My good mother," said Finette, "give me only a corner of the stable."
"Oh!"
said the old woman, laughing and showing the only tooth she had left, which projected from her mouth like a bear's tusk.
"So you want a corner of the stable, do you? Well, you shall have it if you fill my milk pail with gold."
"It is a bargain," said Finette quietly. She opened a leather purse, which she wore at her belt, took from it a golden bullet, and threw it into the milk pail, saying, "Golden bullet, precious treasure, save me if it be thy pleasure." And behold, the pieces of gold began to dance about in the pail. They rose higher and higher, flapping about like fish in a net, while the old woman on her knees gazed with wonder at the sight. When the pail was full, the old woman rose, put her arm through the handle, and said to Finette,
"Madam, all is yours, the house, the cow, and everything else. Hurrah! I am going to town to live like a lady with nothing to do. Oh dear, how I wish I were only 60.
And shaking her crutch, without looking backward, she set out on a run toward Kerver Castle. Finette entered the house. It was a wretched hovel, dark, low, damp, bad-smelling, and full of dust and spiders' webs. A horrible refuge for a woman accustomed to living in the giant's grand castle. Without seeming troubled, Finette went to the hearth, on which a few green boughs were smoking, took another golden bullet from her purse, and threw it into the fire, saying, "Golden bullet, precious treasure, save me if it be thy pleasure." The gold melted, bubbled up, and spread all over the house like running water, and behold, the whole cottage, the walls, the thatch, the wooden rocking-chair, the stool, the chest, the bed, the cow's horns, everything, even to the spiders in their webs, was turned to gold. The house gleamed in the moonlight among the trees, like a star in the night. When Finette had milked the cow, and drunk a little new milk, she threw herself on the bed without undressing, and, worn out by the fatigue of the day, fell asleep in the midst of her tears. Old women do not know how to hold their tongues, at least in Brittany. Finette's hostess had scarcely reached the village when she had hastened to the house of the steward. He was an important personage, who had more than once made her tremble when she had driven her cow into her neighbour's pasture by mistake. The steward listened to the old woman's story, shook his head, and said that it looked like witchcraft. Then he mysteriously bought a pair of scales, weighed the guineas, which he found to be genuine and full of weight, kept as many of them as he could, and advised the owner to tell no one of this strange adventure.
"If it should come to the ears of the bailiff or the seneschal," said he, "the least that would happen to you, mother, would be to lose every one of these beautiful bright guineas. Justice is impartial. It knows neither favour nor repugnance. It takes the whole."
The old woman thanked the steward for his advice, and promised to follow it. She kept her word so well that she only told her story that evening to two neighbours, her dearest friends, both of whom swore on the heads of their little children to keep it a secret. The oath was a solemn one, and so well kept that at noon the next day there was not a boy of 6 in the village that did not point his finger at the old woman, while the very dogs seemed to bark in their language, "Here is the old woman with her guineas." A girl who amuses herself by filling milk pails with gold is not to be found every day. Even though she should be something of a witch, such a girl would none the less be a treasure in a family. The steward, who was a bachelor, made this wise reflection that night on going to bed. Before dawn he rose to make his rounds in the direction of the stranger's cottage. By the first gleam of the day he spied something shining in the distance like a light among the woods. On reaching the place he was greatly surprised to find a golden cottage instead of the wretched hut that had stood there the day before. But on entering the house he was much more surprised and delighted to find a beautiful young girl, with raven hair, sitting by the window and spinning on her distaff with the air of an empress. Like all men, the steward did himself justice, and knew, at the bottom of his heart, that there was not a woman in the world that would not be too happy to give him her hand. Without hesitating, therefore, he declared to Finette that he had come to marry her. The young girl burst out laughing, upon which the steward flew into a passion.
"Take care," said he, in a terrible voice. "I am the master here. No one knows who you are or whence you came. The gold that you gave the old woman has raised suspicions. There is magic in this house. If you do not accept me for a husband this very instant, I will arrest you, and before the night perhaps a witch will be burned before Kerver Castle."
"You are very amiable," said Finette, with a charming grimace. "You have a peculiar way of paying court to ladies. Even when they have decided not to refuse, a gallant gentleman spares their blushes."
"We Bretons are plain-spoken people," replied the steward. "We go straight to the point. Marriage or prison, which do you choose?"
"Oh," cried Finette, laying down the distaff, "there are firebrands falling all over the room."
"Don't trouble yourself," said the steward. "I will pick them up."
"Lay them carefully on top of the ashes," returned Finette. "Have you the tongs?"
"Yes,"
said the steward, picking up the crackling coals. "Abracadabra!" cried Finette, rising. "Villain, may the tongues hold you, and may you hold the tongues till sunset." No sooner said than done. The wicked steward stood there all day long with the tongs in his hand, picking up and throwing back the burning coals that snapped in his face, and the hot ashes that flew into his eyes. It was useless for him to shout, pray, weep, and blaspheme. No one heard him. If Finette had stayed at home, she would doubtless have taken pity on him. But after putting the spell upon him, she hastened to the seashore, where, forgetting everything else, she watched for Yvon in vain. The moment that the sun set, the tongs fell from the steward's hands. He did not stop to finish his errand, but ran as if the devil or justice were at his heels. He made such leaps, he uttered such groans, he was so black and scorched and benumbed, that everyone in the village was afraid of him, thinking that he was mad. The boldest tried to speak to him, but he fled without answering, and hid himself in his house, more ashamed than a wolf that has left his paw in the trap. At evening, when Finette returned home in despair, instead of the steward she found another visitor little less formidable. The bailiff had heard the story of the guineas, and had also made up his mind to marry the stranger. He was not rough like the steward, but a fat, good-natured man who could not speak without bursting into a laugh, showing his great yellow teeth, and puffing and blowing like an ox, though at heart he was not less obstinate or less threatening than his predecessor. Finette entreated the bailiff to leave her alone. He laughed and hinted to her in a good-natured way that, by right of his office, he had the power to imprison and hang people without process of law. She clasped her hands and begged him with tears to go. For his only answer he took out a roll of parchment from his pocket, wrote on it a contract of marriage, and declared to Finette that should he stay all night, he would not leave the house till she had signed the promise.
"Nevertheless," said he, "if you do not like my person, I have another parchment here on which I will write an agreement to live apart, and if my sight annoys you, you have only to shut your eyes."
"Why," said Finette, "I might decide to do as you wish, if I were sure of finding a good husband in you, but I am afraid."
"Of what, my dear child?"
asked the bailiff, smiling, and already as proud as a peacock. "Do you think," she said, with a pettish air, "that a good husband would leave the door wide open, and not know that his wife was freezing with cold?"
"You are right, my dear," said the bailiff. "It was very stupid of me. I will go and shut it."
"Have you hold of the knob?" asked Finette.
"Yes, my charmer," answered the happy bailiff. "I am just shutting the door."
"Abracadabra!" cried Finette. "May you hold the door, villain, and may the door hold you till daybreak." And behold, the door opened and shut and slammed against the walls like an eagle flapping its wings. You may judge what a dance the poor captive kept up all night. Never had he tried such a waltz, and I imagine that he never wished to dance a second of the same sort. Sometimes the door swung open with him in the street, sometimes it flew back and crushed him against the wall. He swung backward and forward, screaming, swearing, weeping, and praying, but all in vain. The door was deaf, and Finette asleep. At daybreak his hands unclasped, and he fell in the road head foremost. Without waiting to finish his errand, he ran as if the Moors were after him. He did not even turn